From 2007 to 2008, my wife Kristen and I and our kids lived in upstate New York in the Adirondack Mountains. We lived in a house that was had a long driveway, and it was lined by big tall pine trees. And one of the things that we noticed about living up there was that there's just humongous pine trees all over the place. One day we were at home and a storm rolled in and the wind was blowing and we heard loud noises outside. And as we looked, we just saw these pine trees toppling over. And when we went out later to investigate what had happened, the wind wasn't really that bad, but these pine trees fell over and we discovered why. Their root systems were not very deep at all. And in the Adirondack Mountains, in a lot of places, the soil is not very deep before you hit rock. So the roots don't always have a long way to be able to travel to be able to be really strong for that tree. So though the tree can grow really, really tall and look majestic and beautiful, its root system is not always able to support it when the wind blows. And that makes me think of a passage in 1 Samuel 15 where we're looking at the life of King Saul. He was king over the Israelite people, the Jewish nation. And from the life of Saul, we see someone who was elevated to majesty, to glory. He was in charge and he was powerful, but the roots in his life were not very deep. And in this passage we're going to look at together, we're going to see the dangers of what we're going to call pursuing reputation. King Saul pursued reputation, and just like one of those pine trees, his life grew to amazing heights. But when pressure came, he toppled over very easily because his root system wasn't able to support him. He had reputation, but he didn't have character. And in these 2 weeks, we're going to talk about the difference between reputation and character. In this session specifically, we're going to talk about reputation, and I want to try to convince you that reputation is not worthy of your pursuit. You need to be pursuing character. But what we're going to do is look at 5 choices that reputation makes to show you why reputation, though not unimportant, shouldn't be your sole pursuit. So we're going to get into 1 Samuel 15, and though we typically show you the verses on the screen, I think it's important that you see them for yourself. So if you have a device or a Bible, open it up to 1 Samuel 15. As we do that, let me give you some of the context of what's happening here. Saul is the king of the Israelite nation. God has chosen the Israelite people as his very own, and he wants to bless the world through them. They're his chosen people, and so he is using them to represent him in the world. Now, as such, God made a promise that the people who are bad or mistreat the Israelites, he's going to curse them. He's going to take care of them, and that's kind of what's happening here. So God is speaking through Samuel, his prophet, to King Saul, the leader of the Israelite people. And what God's instructions are is the Israelites need to destroy this entire group of people called the Amalekites. The Amalekites had severely mistreated the Israelites in Jewish history, and God was going to use Saul to take care of that, to give them their retribution. And part of what happens is God tells Samuel to go tell Saul that they need to attack the Amalekites and wipe them out. Like every single person, he wants them, he says, do not spare them, put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. And while we read that and say, what? Why would God do that? What we don't often understand is sin is a much bigger deal than we think it is. So when we look at passages like this and say, God is being so harsh, we have to remember we're probably not understanding the depth of sin. So God is going to deal with that. And in this context, in this passage, God is giving Saul the instructions, and we're going to see how Saul is more concerned about his reputation than he is his character. So we're going to show you 5 choices reputation makes. The first one is this: it takes credit. Reputation takes credit. Look at verses 12 and 13. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told, Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone down on to Gilgal. When Samuel reached him, Saul said, "The Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions." So they just finished wiping out the Amalekite people. And in celebration, he doesn't throw a festival for the people. He doesn't give them rewards and blessings and speak over them and throw a party. No, he builds a monument for himself. the people, the soldiers, they all carried out the instructions, but to celebrate, he sets up a monument to himself. That's because he's concerned about taking credit. He's worried about his reputation, and that's what reputation does. It takes credit. So though the credit belonged to the people who carried it out, he took credit for it and set up a monument for himself. That's not the only thing that reputation does. Reputation also blames others. Look at verses 14 and 15. Samuel said, "What is this then, this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear?" Saul answered, "The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest." So remember, the instructions were to wipe out everyone and everything. And while Saul and Samuel are talking, Samuel is hearing the animals make sounds and asks Saul, "What's going on?" Now, Saul had just taken credit for the victory, but now that he's in trouble, guess what he's doing? He's blaming others. He's blaming the people. He says, they spared the best of the sheep. The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. But we totally destroyed the rest. He's taking credit for what they did well, but he's passing the blame on what they failed to do. This is what someone who's concerned about reputation does. They're trying to preserve themselves at any cost. So they pass on the blame. That's not the only thing that reputation does. Reputation also makes excuses. Look down at verses 20 and 21. Samuel has challenged Saul, and Saul responds by saying, "But I did obey the Lord," Saul said. "I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal." He's making excuses. He says, "Hey, listen, we did obey. I went on the mission. I completely destroyed everything, but we thought it would be a good idea to bring back the king and then some of the animals so we could make sacrifices to God." Do you see what he's doing here? Do you see how he's making excuses for why he didn't follow through? Someone who's concerned about reputation is going to make excuses for why they didn't do what they should have done. And this is exactly what Saul is doing. Here's the crazy thing about some of these things. They're really easy to see in someone else's life, but they're very difficult to see in my own life. Why? Because I want to make excuses for myself. I want to give myself a free pass. And that's the trouble that we can get into when we're pursuing reputation over character. There's a fourth choice that reputation makes, and we see it in verses 22 and 23. Samuel is replying to Saul now, and he says, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." This is what Saul did. Saul decided that though he didn't obey, he didn't follow through with God's commands, there was still something that he could do. He could still pull a victory out of this. He was going to keep the animals and he was going to sacrifice them because in Saul's mind, God values sacrifices. He wants us to do this. And here's the fourth choice that reputation makes. It pursues the immediate. Reputation it's concerned with what happens right now. The long view is not what Saul's thinking about here. He's not thinking about following the instructions. He did what he wanted to do, and now he's trying to pull an immediate victory out of it. He was going to offer sacrifices and try to rally the people around these sacrifices and call it a very good thing. And Samuel says, if you've not obeyed, if you've not followed through, you have not done a very good thing. You only concerned yourself with a short-term victory, but you have suffered a long-term loss. In fact, Samuel told Saul in this moment, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. And at this point, it's crashing down for Saul. He just learns that because he disobeyed, and this wasn't the first time, but this is a big deal. Because he has disobeyed God, God has said, you can no longer be king over my people. So very, very sad story, and I wish it got better, but it doesn't. It gets worse. Because Saul makes another choice, which is born out of his pursuit of reputation. And that is this. Reputation concerns itself with appearance. Look at verse 28. Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not a human being that he should change his mind." Saul said, "I have sinned. But please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God." So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. Can you pick up what's happening here? Saul is concerned with appearance. He knows he blew it. He admitted he sinned, but he said, "Honor me in front of the people." Like, I understand I'm losing the kingdom, but I have a reputation to uphold. I'm still king right now, so just would you help me look good? And that's how blind reputation is. When you're pursuing reputation, you're not concerned with what's actually happening. You're only concerned with how it looks. And so you're really sensitive to embarrassment. You're really sensitive to shame. You're really sensitive to who knows. You're really sensitive to just coming out with it and people actually having a clue as to who you really are. It's that pine tree that has fallen over and is so embarrassed that someone would actually see that a pine tree that tall could have that little of a root system. This is what reputation and pursuit of reputation does. When you're pursuing reputation, you can grow to great heights. You can have a lot of influence. You can make a big difference. But if your root system, the substance of your life, is not deep and cannot support the reputation that you have built, then I have to tell you, it's only a matter of time before it comes crashing down. And I just want you to know that if that's you, we love you. You don't have to remain that way. If you are afraid, if you heard this and you are afraid and fearful that this just might be you, then talk to your group. Talk to someone you can trust about how to send your root system down deep. In fact, pay attention because in next session, we're going to talk about the choices that character makes. And we're going to see the difference that God can make in the life of someone who was once pursuing reputation, but then can begin pursuing character. It's not too late for you. Hang in there. We love you and we're for you. So pay attention.